Hi guys, thank you so much for coming. I know it's early in the morning and everyone is just here waiting for Joel, who I too am very excited to hear. If we are broadcasting on the campground, I would like to let everyone know, since about 70% of the campground is male, even though this talk is called The Good Girl's Guide to Self-Ownership, it does also apply to boys. So I think I'll start there. I was going to ask people, who here has never been to PorcFest before? Do we have any? Right back there. Wonderful. Yay. So I had the fortune of talking to these ladies before I got up here, and they are locals from New Hampshire who have come, who have never been to PorcFest before. They're just here for a couple of days. They came to see Joel, and that is part of our mission, right? We are building the libertarian homeland here in New Hampshire. And if I have my druthers, and I will say everyone said we would not get Ross Ulbricht out of prison, and we historically and truly did that. So if I have my druthers, we're going to create an independent country here in the great state of New Hampshire. It starts with the Free State, and it starts with our human action. So I'm going to talk today a little bit about my personal journey sort of against the landscape of a framing which I think could work for many of us on our quest to claim self-ownership. And the idea I came up with is, what if each one of us treated our unit, our body, as our own independent country? Because the dreams and the aspirations we have and the things that we want to create here in New Hampshire all stem from self-ownership. Because if you are not in control of yourself, mindful of yourself, know yourself from a stoic perspective, then it becomes actually very difficult to navigate the larger world in a way. I believe each and every one of us is actually the steward of your own life, and if we focused more on ourselves and paid a little less attention to the numbnuts out there trying to destroy the world, we can actually scale up faster because we're going to be better humans, I suppose. So I want to talk about how you can rewrite your life, how you can rewire your brain, and how you can become the sovereign ruler of your own life. So the quest is to find out authentically who you are and to live your unapologetic life, but with mindfulness and with actual control. So I wrote this joke that says, the only good nation is imagination. And I think that we should all, spend some time today sort of imagining, right? So this is going to be a bit of a journey in terms of who you can be, what the different breakdowns is of this notion of you as a country. But the idea is that if we come up with a simplistic framework to explain these ideas, it makes it easier to translate. And the more relatable ideas we can spread, the easier it becomes to spread our message. Because I think sometimes, we have this, especially libertarians, but I would say most people in the liberty sphere, whether you're ANCAP or whatever label you want to give yourself, we suffer from I am rightism in a way that is actually debilitating. It is very hard to create a movement, in the words actually of Ross Ulbricht, and I hope he'll say them here on Saturday at 1 p.m. when he does his speech. I was at Bitcoin 2025, which was an insane conference, by the way. You can tell Bitcoin's up because there were 35,000 attendees. It was bananas. My background is I was a corporate lawyer in Silicon Valley for a long time, and I watched Sailor on stage, and I was like, you can tell this is a very frothy bull market, because as a lawyer, I was like, I wouldn't let someone get on stage and talk that way. Like, it's only upside, 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 no risk, right? And you're like, wait a second. But I do think we have 3 years here where it seems like crypto is being adopted more. But at that conference, Ross used this, what I'm now calling almost a mantra, where he said, it's about freedom, decentralization, and unity. And so maybe the area I want to focus on today is that sort of decentralization down to the individual, right? So if you're your own country, maybe we should think about this as almost a gamification, right? So there are ways that we can think about things now, and that's sort of how I've learned to hack my life as well. So let's use our imagination. So the way I broke it down for me is basically body, mind, soul, right? That's kind of how I view my unit, right? So we have our bodies, we have our minds, and then we have our spiritual side, whether it's your relationship with God or a maker or something, hopefully, that you have in your life that is external to you, that gives you meaning in a way that makes you holistically whole, authentically you. And so if you think about the body as your infrastructure, so it's the infrastructure of your country, right? So it's your terra firma, it's your homeland. So over the years, I've done a lot of independence work here in New Hampshire, and I don't know if people are familiar with this, but we've actually introduced 2 secession bills in New Hampshire. Woo! And yes, they haven't done as great as they could, but one would recommend, if you haven't watched the Dr. Phil episode, in which I represented our position, and actually it's a good one to watch in any event, but you know, Dr. Phil had us on, a guy from Texas, me from the New Hampshire exit movement, and then, you know, a couple of people who were there as sort of ringers. And I think the pro-independence people actually made the most compelling arguments and were really the most persuasive, because what you're talking about really is self-ownership. You're talking about self-determination, right? And when we talk about self-determination in the context of nation building, then, you know, if you ask Grok, it'll be like, sure, this country in Africa that was colonized should totally have self-determination rights. And it's like, okay, Grok, so if that country's allowed to have them, why isn't New Hampshire allowed to have them, right? And so our arguments are actually very compelling, so much so that when we were finished with the episode, and I'll just tell a little story, because it's like one of the weirdest or fanciest things that's ever happened to me in my media landscape. They take you, it was like a weekend. They fly you out, they put you up in a hotel, and then the recording was the Monday morning. But they only record at like 1 in the afternoon, but they put you in a green room from like 8 a.m. that morning. And I was like, is this supposed to be a stew room? Like, are they working me? Are there hidden cameras? Like, what's going on? I'm just doing my breathing exercises and texting people and being like, don't fuck up, right? And I hear the producers through the walls talking to the other guests. And he's like, so remember, you want to hit this point and whatever. And I'm a very ad hoc in the moment. I live in the now. I'm present here. So sometimes I have cards, but everyone who knows me knows that's not always the case. And I'm hearing him give all these notes to the other guests, and I'm like, oh, please don't come into my room and tell me I need to remember to say these things, because if you tell me I need to remember them, I'm gonna forget them. That's just how my brain works. And the guy comes into my green room and he goes, so we just want you to bring it. And I was like, okay, that I could do. And so I brought it. And when the episode was done, we get our photos with Dr. Phil. Side note, that man's hands are so soft. He has not touched like a doorknob in 20 years. Like, I was like, wow. I mean, I shook it and all I could think was, it's like touching silk. It was amazing. So we get our photos and then we're done. And the producer comes running out of the box and he goes, oh my God. He was like, that was great. I was like, yay. And of course, like while it's happening, you're like, oh, like, I hope I'm not screwing up. And they're like, we'd like to do a second interview with you in their like little thing for social media. And they interviewed me for over an hour, and I laid out all the steps, what we've been doing, why it's a compelling argument, what the reasoning is. And let's remember, part of our reasoning for many, many of us is actually that we are anti-war. Like, people forget, libertarians are the original anti-war people. And I came from the left, and I'm like, where are our people? Where did they go? What is wrong, right? Like, libertarianism at its heart has the non-aggression principle. You don't use force first. And I'm sorry, I'm gonna go on a little side note here, but you can't be like, hey, I think you might hit me one day, so I'm gonna punch you in the face first. That is not actually a valid foreign policy. So that long speech or interview, I guess, that they did afterwards, that has not seen the light of day. And I was like, oh, that's interesting and very, very telling. So with the independence work, what we've done here in New Hampshire over the past 5 years is we've introduced 2 bills to secede. The first bill was 2 lines, and it just said, New Hampshire will have it's a constitutional amendment. So in New Hampshire, folks who aren't familiar, we don't have referendums, we don't have props. So the way, if you want to do something crazy and radical, is you use the constitutional process. So in the time that I've been in New Hampshire, which has been since 2008, I moved during a blizzard in February, do not recommend. But 10 people I did not know showed up at my house in a blizzard to help unload the truck. I was from New York City. My husband and I were kind of like new to this whole thing. In fact, we rented a brand new duplex on what I fondly refer to all my friends as, I live on a lake now. And then one of my neighbors was like, that's a pond. I was like, noted. One of the guys who came to unload the truck was like, hey, you want to see my hand grenade? And I was like, I am not in New York City anymore. I forget why, when we moved, right? So, bills, thank you. So the constitutional amendments we introduced, so I moved in 2008. In the time I've been here, we have passed 2 constitutional amendments in New Hampshire. One had to do with standing for taxpayers, because they were doing this like nonsense argument where they were saying, oh, you can't sue in this town because you don't have standing. And it's like, no, but you're taking my taxes, so I should be able to let you know what I think about this issue. And the other one was to do with privacy, so it's Article 2B, and what that says is that our right to privacy in New Hampshire is inherent and essential, and there hasn't been a lawsuit on that issue yet, but I do think that that is actually a really good area where we can maybe start to expand some liberties. So my point is, it's not impossible to get a constitutional amendment passed in New Hampshire. But the bars are quite high. So it has to pass the House and the Senate by 60%. And then, so the House in New Hampshire has 400 legislators. They represent, on average, about 3,300 to 3,700 people. Legislators in New Hampshire get paid the vast sum of $100 a year. And then generously, they give you toll money too. So, you know, they're all just ripping us off on the tolls, you know. And so with the constitutional amendments, 60%, and then it goes on the ballot for that election, and that on the ballot has to pass at 67%. So this is a high threshold. What does that mean? It means that if Granite Staters, if all of us who live here, actually if 67% say, yeah, actually our right to privacy should be inherent, and you know, they shouldn't be spying on us and doing all these things, then you can get so-called radical things done, right? And when we introduced the original CACR, so that stands for a constitutional amendment, it went to the House, and that one, as I said, was just 2 lines. You want it to be really simple because you have to put the language on the ballot. And so what we've seen in the past is sometimes people will have a good idea, but they're I am rightism and we're too smartism leads to, oh, I'm going to put in everything. And then it's like a wall of 1 page of wording, and people are like, I don't know what that means. I'm not going to read all of this. No, right? So you want it to be crisp and clear and short. And so that one was just, you know, if we pass this constitutional amendment, New Hampshire will peaceably secede from the Union and become its own country. All right, so did we get 60% in the House and Senate? No, no, we did not. But we did get 13 legislators out of 400 to vote for it. Now, there were 13 original colonies, and you have to start somewhere. So people were like, oh, you should be so embarrassed. And I was like, what? As long as we didn't get 0, I'm winning. So, you know, I was like, you got to start somewhere. So the first year we got 13 out of 400. The next time we came to the State House, we listened to what people were saying and what they were sort of criticizing, and we really tried to address those issues. So to the language, we actually added a qualifying event, which was a triggering event that said if the national debt reaches $40 trillion, then it goes on the ballot and then we can decide. So the idea was, let's tie it to something concrete that helps people actually understand what the concerns are, right? Because yes, it's anti-war, but it is also, we all understand our own household budgets. And if any of us were running our households the way the US government is running their budget, we would be divorced and probably in prison. So the question becomes, why do we think it's okay to keep ratcheting up this debt, right? And at the time, when we put in the bill, and this was in 23, the national debt was at 34 trillion. It's now up to 36 trillion. The big, beautiful bill that needs an S at the end of that last B for a BS is talking about an extra 4 to 5 trillion. And so we know this debt is not sustainable. And if you're a student of history, right, empires fail when they become overextended. And I mean, candidly, when I saw this nonsense with Iran, I was like, we must be incredibly close to a dollar collapse for them to be like, we gotta go make war, and a big one, right? Because that is, at this stage, almost the play in these scenarios. So we said, all right, if the national debt reaches 40 trillion, we can put it on the ballot. And I thought that was gonna give us 10 years to do, good grassroots work. I mean, I think we're gonna reach 40 trillion in the next 2 years, easily. So that's kind of terrifying. That bill got 23 people to vote for it. So we basically doubled, with Carla math, our support, right? And so that is telling, because it was like we listened, we caucused a little bit, and we did actually see our support double. Then we introduced a bill to say, hey, why don't we have a study committee that can actually address these questions? Because all of us have maybe grappled with these ideas, because we've grappled with the ideas of self-ownership, of individualization, of community within groups of people, with you as an individual, all of that. But a lot of our ideas actually sound really radical, right? So grandma, or I always use Connie Thompson. She lives across the street from me. She's 89 years old. She is a smoker. She made it through COVID. I was like, okay, she's a strong New Hampshire woman, and they're here and they're everywhere, right? Because you see them still in the winter on their roofs doing their Christmas lights, and you're like, should you be on a ladder? But good for you, right? So I'm always like, okay, what would Connie think about this, right? Can I talk to her and be like, hey, Connie, this is why I think this, right? So you always want to be almost addressing someone's barrier or criticism, or there's a word for it, I'm not gonna come on it, but before it even starts. So the questions in that study committee were things like, what would happen to my Social Security, right? That's a real one that everyone asks. The reason that video at Dr. Phil never went anywhere was, I was like, well, Americans in Mexico and Puerto Rico and everywhere else in the world still get their Social Security. So why can't Granite Staters in an independent country still get their Social Security? They paid in, right? That's a concern. People ask things like, how would it work with passports and border control? Half my family lives in Maine, someone might say, like Eric Brakey, right? Our new executive director here at the Free State Project. He moved from Maine, but his parents are still in Maine. And they're like, would I have to get a passport to come over? And I'm like, maybe, but maybe we could just do like you would do with the EU, say, and you would just have, deals with the surrounding states, and you could have some kind of pact, some kind of movement pact. Maybe you could voluntarily opt in to a tracking device on your car that just knows when you're going in and out, right? Like, there are solutions to things that we resist because it's from the state, right? So it's creating centralized control that, since we're not in a trust circle with the state, we're like, oh, I don't want you to know that. But if it was a private company and you had actual contractual terms, which, by the way, are not terms and conditions online, because can I just say, as a lawyer, I'm like, how? Like, we do not have rule of law anymore, because how can you retroactively go into a contract that we apparently have both agreed to and change the terms, which is happening all the time? And so I don't know what you guys are doing with Grok, but basically what I'm doing with all the AI models I play around with is I'm playing I am rightism with them too, right? But you can play the game of explain this paradox to me, and it'll be like, yeah, you're kind of right, And so that's interesting to see. And total side quest here. I would love to see someone write a screenplay, maybe I'll do it with the AI, where, think about it, who is looking at what questions we're asking the AI? Because I think whoever is seeing what people are curious about, like, that is a lot of power. That is a lot of you're understanding things at a next level, right? So I think there's some intrigue there, and we can write some kind of thriller. But all right, so that's the independence work. So we said, okay, with the study committee, let's actually start to answer some of these questions that people have. So that's sort of the background of where we are with independence in New Hampshire. But I think the way to think about things, or the way at least I think about it, is I think about the cosmos, right? Our galaxies and our universe, and then it gets smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller until it's in us. Turns out apparently our hearts are vortexes, not muscles, which I think is very interesting. And so if we're down to the smallest us, how do we go about creating that best us? So if you think about the mind, well, I always say mind, body, soul, but I think the order for this is actually body, mind, soul. So the body is the unit, and, sorry, I gotta put my glasses on for this part. So that's your infrastructure, right? So as I said, it's the homeland, the terra firma. So when you're thinking about your body that way, then the questions you should be asking yourself is, what are my borders? What is allowed in? What is not allowed in? What are my boundaries? How do I set my boundaries with people? So if you think about your border as something like, oh, what is allowed in? If you're mindful about your health, then you start to think about things like the food I'm nourishing my body with, the love that I invite into my life or not, right? We are in such a conflict-driven dynamic now with humanity, and I'm sorry, but it's gross. It's not healthy, and it's like, why would we want to spend all of our time, I mean, at this stage, we're fighting our own friends, right? Back to that idea of I am rightism. Instead of being like, let's focus on the state, how do we decentralize, and how do we make New Hampshire and ourselves free? So a way to also think about the body is sort of like, what do you need for your maintenance, right? Like, we as libertarians like to say, who will build the roads? So like, who's building your roads, dudes, you know? And then what is your defense? What is your defense to your body? And that, honestly, is your immune system. And all of us went through COVID. All of us saw what happened. All of us hopefully had the realization that your health is your number one defense, because not only a healthy body, but a healthy mind allowed people to stand against an onslaught of psyops that was like unbelievable, like never in the history of the world, because never in the history of the world has everyone had a direct propaganda gadget in their pockets, making them crazy. And that is where we are now. So when you think about your defense, you should be thinking the defense of your body. You should be thinking, how do I hone my immune system? And what goes hand in hand there is inflammation, right? Like really getting a grip on inflammation. Why? Because one, I mean, they like to call it autoimmune diseases, but I'm like, where do they come from? Could they possibly be coming from the thing that you inject into people to fuck up their immune systems? Could that be it? I don't know, but it seems kind of likely to me. So figuring out how to keep your corpus, your terra firma, your body as healthy as possible will help you become more self-independent. And then you want to, with your body as well, be thinking about your emergency protocols. So that's kind of like, oh, what do you do when something happens? Maybe there's a flood in the metaphor. But then, your emergency protocol might be, if you're in AA, might be like call your sponsor, or call that trusted friend, right? Take action so that it doesn't fester and then become a bigger problem later. Then, if we think about our minds as sort of the government, I know that's very statist, but work with me here, then your mind basically has, your legislative branch, your executive branch, your judicial branch, your public affairs, and your foreign relations. So you should be thinking about, for your own mind, you're like, what is my value system? Like, these are things we should actually actively be monitoring and deciding and mindfully writing down and going, okay, what are my values and beliefs? So for me, a core value is actually trying to achieve alignment between my thoughts, words, and deeds. And that is why I try not to be conflict-driven. I'm like, it's a lot easier to be nasty on the internet and get way more eyeballs than to try and be, as they fondly refer to me in every article, the cheerful lady. And I was like, okay, I guess there are worse things to be. But figure out for yourself what those values are that actually drive you as a human. And then when you look at your executive branch, you should be thinking, like, what are my decision-making processes, right? Like, how do I deal with a decision? Do I immediately react and then I'm in a reactive cycle? Or do I take a moment? Do I like to step away and be like, I can't do this right now, let's circle back in an hour? But whatever those executive functions are, you should have your own game plan. And when you think about the executive, you should also come up with a title for your life, right? Be like, I am CEO of, my unit, or, I didn't come up with the title, but they call me Queen Quill, right? And it's like, maybe you're a king, no kings. Maybe you're a queen, only queens. Someone did ask me before this talk, they were like, can boys come to this talk? And I was like, what do you mean? And they were like, well, it said the Good Girl's Guide to Self-Ownership. And I was like, so men don't think they can get advice from women? Okay, I was like, oh, note to self, when you do the book, do exactly the same content, but call the other one the Bad Boys Guide. See, and you could probably sell them and you would probably get away with it, because honestly, I mean, that's the future, right? You can just tailor content to, it's bananas, which is also why it is so important to actually know what you personally believe and what you personally drives you and what your personal values are. So when you're thinking about your executive functions, I think it's really important to ask yourself, who controls your mind? And all of you are going to be like, I do. But I'm like, do you? Because I don't think, given what I saw through COVID mania, that is necessarily the case. Now, many of us here are different to maybe the entire world out there. But the reality is, you should mindfully be thinking about how to detox yourself from propaganda. And if you are spending a lot of time on your screens, like the gentleman over there, then then you should know that, right? Because it is an addiction like other addictions. So you actually need to limit screen time like it's crack. I mean, I'm not kidding. And back to that sort of body idea, like if you want to regain your health, the work lies in what you're eating, how much sugar you're consuming. People don't want to hear this, but sugar causes cancer. Like if you eat a lot of sugar, it makes your cells ferment. So sugar, like you should be very careful about how much sugar you're consuming. And you should be thinking about regular exercise and all the things Granny told you and all the things the good girl's gonna tell you. So now I'm gonna veer off again because by now you guys see what kind of speech this is. It was so funny because I've been doing a lot of personal work over the last 5, 6, well, I quit drinking in 2017. I quit drinking. Anyone who came to PorcFest before 2017 knows why I quit drinking. And it was a very liberating, in the true sense of the word, decision, because alcohol is a neurotoxin that rots your brain. There is, according to actual scientific studies, no safe level of alcohol to consume. I know people don't want to hear that, but that's the truth. Now, the reality of life is also you can pick your poisons, so maybe that's the poison you pick. But having a clear mind now has helped me see that voluntarily inducing and bringing poisons into your life actually makes your mind susceptible to propaganda, to conflict, to things. When you say neurotoxin and you say things like inflammation, I want you to understand, I believe what it is inflammation is hell on a cellular level. So you are on earth and you are choosing through your choices to make your body burn. And it's like, well, if you look at it that way, it's like, why would you do that? Why would you induce hell in your own body? That seems very counterintuitive for people who want to have the best ride on earth that they can. And so part of my realization when I became clean was, and this will explain where the good girl part comes in, was I think I always wanted to be a bad girl. But what I realized in my earnest self is I'm a good girl. And what that means is like you have to go and you have to like say these obvious things that your grandma told you. But it's like if no one's willing to get up anymore and say these things, then we're not going to change the world and we are not going to empower the next generation to truly take that sense of self-ownership. So the last one in this, so we've done mind, body, so this is the soul part, right? Is figuring out what your culture is, what your constitution, your personal constitution is, or what your national identity is, right? So I've come to the realization I'm like on the cusp of classical punk at this stage. And I was like, isn't that cute? Like a classic punk, that's almost an oxymoron. But also that it's okay to want to be good. And I feel like that's a weird thing to have to say. But I think we live in a society where it's like no one values striving to be wholesome or striving to truly excel at being healthy and then translating and giving that to the next generation. And so I think it's very much our duty to do those things. And so what are some of the tools for that, right? So ultimately, self-ownership is a relationship with yourself. And then it's how are you accountable to yourself? Because if we're talking about alignment of mind, body, and soul, we also do a lot of weird self-talk and we do a lot of stories we tell ourselves and we're like, oh, I don't drink a lot. I only drink 2 glasses, 2 bottles a night. You know, like those things, right? Those excuses. And so how or what are the tools that you can use to make yourself more accountable? And these are simple things that we know that we just have to do. It's eat right. It is exercise daily. It is maybe start a journal. Honestly, if I can encourage you guys to do one thing. And I know so many people, including myself, who were so resistant to this for so long. But the beauty of journaling, of writing down your thoughts on a daily basis, is twofold. One, if you decide you're going to start journaling and you make that promise to yourself, and then you just keep that one promise. Maybe you just say to yourself, I am going to journal for 1 year, every day. And then I can assure you after that year, you will do it for the rest of your life because there will be value to it. Why? Because you are taking the time in a meditative space to figure out stuff. Sometimes I just write about my day, and then sometimes I veer off into, la Carla land or whatever. But it's always, and then honestly, a lot of times when you get it out, you've let it go. So whoever you were mad at or whatever, it's a release. So it's a gift to yourself. So I would recommend do journaling, and then I would say, set your goals and then do a quarterly review. Actually check in with yourself. If you're doing health on a very granular level, start doing blood tests and then keep them, create spreadsheets, measure things. The nerds love that stuff. My husband does all our spreadsheets, and I do the cooking and the nourishing and the bone broths and that stuff. And then make sure you have a network or a community, right, of trusted people that can help keep you on track. So what are we building here in New Hampshire? We are building that support system to support you as an individual nation, because now if we're all little nations and we're coming together, what do we have to do? We have to do diplomacy, because we don't actually get to blow your neighbor up just because you disagree with him, right? You actually have to use your words. And what is that? That is voluntarism, right? Because you're one country, so you can't write a law for his country. But I'm like, but I want to negotiate something, so we got to figure out a way to do that. And that puts us on track for a much more voluntary world and not one where it's this top-down control. Because maybe when I finish this book, I think my next book is going to be called The Cult of One. And here's the idea, right? Because sometimes people will be like, are you a cult leader? Is the Free State Project a cult? Is it, that's cultish, that's weird. Why do you guys move there? What's going on? And I'm like, have you tried to run a cult of individuals? Do not recommend. And so the cult of one is truly that understanding that if we can create one individual and one unit, and your focus is mostly on you, your life, your family, your friends, and how we are literally on a localized level making our personal lives better by banding together as individuals, but we have the strength in numbers. So back to what Ross was saying about freedom, that is our North Star. Decentralization, that is each of us as an individual following these rules and other rules to become more self-determined, but more self-owned. And then we have unity in all of us agreeing that this is how we navigate the world. You come wholly to me, I come wholly to you, and therefore we have to work together with our words to figure things out. So if it sounds like I'm telling you what Granny told you when you were in the sandbox, 40 years ago, yeah, that is actually what's going on. The good ideas stick around because they're good ideas. So, there are some barriers to self-ownership or self-determination, and I'll probably do a talk on this later, but these are the things to think about, right? What are the external influences that make this hard? Do you have internal division in yourself, and what does that look like? Like, I like to eat healthy, but I also love me a can of Pringles, and I won't have them in the house. So in South Africa, where I'm originally from, if you want to catch a monkey, this is how you do it. You put nuts in a tree that has a knoll or a hole in it, and the monkey will stick its hand in the hole, and then it'll grab the nuts, and then it won't let go. So it'll get stuck in the tree, and then you can catch a monkey, because they're like, I have the nuts. I'm not going to let go of the nuts. So that's me in a Pringle can. So, if you have those things that are triggering, just don't have them around. There's also, resource scarcity, but of course, in a community, that is something we can overcome. And then there is a threat of sort of violence and instability. But again, I think the healthier, in the true sense of the word, a community is, the less and less those threats become, because we have, as a community, sort of decided this is the way we are going to navigate our energy fields as individualized, self-determined, self-owned humans. So I think I'm going to leave you guys there, but thank you very much for your time. And if this sounds interesting, please follow up when the book comes out. Get the Bad Boys Guide if that's your flavor, or get the Good Girls Guide if that's your flavor. And in about 5 minutes' time, we will have the wonderful Joel Salatin, who will be giving us his keynote remarks. But thank you all very much for coming.